Hello, I thank you for watching this important video. I have a lot of things to show you, as well as an important message. I am going to plainly explain to you how ordinary iron, the most abundant element on Earth, the cheapest metal at about 20 cents a pound, and one of the most abundant elements in the entire universe, is in fact an inexhaustible source of clean energy using already well understood properties of electromagnetism. I am not really saying anything new at all. I'm just putting the pieces together for you and showing you how they fit together. Initially, skepticism is understandable, as there are a lot of questionable and difficult to understand inventions relating to energy. This is not any sort of miracle claim of free energy in any way. It is merely another form of alternate energy production that will have its pros and cons, just like all other forms of energy. However, as you will soon clearly understand after watching this video, everything I propose is just plain, simple, established, elementary science, and it all can be very easily proven and demonstrated. I know that convincing people will be a challenge, and so I will show you over a dozen simple experiments to prove my point. This is not difficult at all to understand, and I'm making this video for all of the mechanics and teachers, soldiers, even dropouts, just all of the ordinary people of the world. If you have even the most rudimentary understanding of what an atom is, of what magnets are, of what electricity is, and how an engine runs, then you will have absolutely no trouble understanding everything in this video. The truth is that even children will instinctively understand everything that I'm going to say. Unfortunately, a lot of adults have long ago lost their openness and innocence. People my age and younger have been told their whole lives about the importance of the environment, of recycling, global warming. I've been warned repeatedly about the excess consumption of goods and power, and about how America was a big problem because of this. I, like any good person, care deeply about the world, but I always knew that the argument against consumption was not the right argument somehow. But at the same time, I've witnessed in my life oil spill after oil spill, and one nuclear disaster or other environmental disaster after another. I didn't know how to reconcile the discrepancy. Now I do, and elemental iron energy is that answer. The benefits of this new source of energy is that it is extremely clean, versatile, and cost-effective when compared to other sources and forms of energy production. One of the things that will confuse people is Newton's laws, which are often summarized to state that energy can never be created nor destroyed. This axiom was developed many hundreds of years ago to explain closed-loop thermodynamic systems and gravitational systems such as pulleys. In those systems, the axiom works perfect and it makes perfect sense. But he created those theories before electromagnetism was understood, and it is now proven that they do not always apply to quantum physics. Magnetism and electromagnetism are quantum physics. The fact is that Newton just did not imagine quite how much energy is contained in matter like Einstein did. Einstein gave us the equation E equals mc squared. That means that there is an unimaginable amount of energy in each and every gram of matter. This little gold magnet here weighs 1 gram. If just 1 gram of matter were instantly converted into the pure energy contained within it, it would be equal to many thousands of atomic bombs. What I'm going to show you is just one way that we can tap into this vast reservoir of energy. Newton's laws and theories have been proven not to provide all the answers for or always apply to quantum physics such as magnetism. I will show you a lot of experiments to make my case here. Let us start by examining how light, heat and cold, and wind can make energy by using simple experiments. This is called a radiometer, It has 4 vanes encased in glass that are white on one side and black on the other. This represents the potential of solar energy. The black side of the vanes absorb the light energy, while the light is reflected off of the white side of the vanes. This will cause the vanes to physically move when light is shown upon it. It is encased in glass because it is such a weak force that it would be disrupted by even the slightest breeze. Light energy has the weakest energy density and potential of all energy sources. It is only commonly used because half the Earth is bathed in sunlight at any given time. This is a pinwheel, and it represents wind energy. When placed in a wind, such as this fan here is providing, you can see that it causes the pinwheel to turn. It is definitely turning more robustly than the radiometer, but note that I can still stop it with my finger. Wind energy has a stronger potential than light energy, but the speed and direction of wind is unpredictable and highly variable in most places. Now this is a Stirling engine invented by Robert Stirling in 1816. This is also called an external combustion engine, and it operates by heat differential similar to earlier steam engines. Even modern industrial megawatt steam engines work using the same basic principle. I have here a cup of boiling water. If we place the Stirling engine on it, soon it will begin to move. It is basically converting the heat energy to physical motion. The energy potential of boiling water is significant, and that is why it is used for the majority of energy production to this day. However, note, I can still easily stop it with my finger, just as easily as the pen will. Let me remove the Stirling engine and move on to the next experiment. Put it over here. Now let us look at battery power and electricity generation. This is a small and basic electrical motor in its most simple form. It consists of a battery, a magnet, and this coil of copper wire. And this will demonstrate the energy potential that is contained in a battery. See, it's turning the copper wire, but I can still easily stop it with my finger. Now here is another commercially made small electric motor. If I connect it to the batteries, you will see it turn. Now it's definitely turning much more strongly than the other generator. Note I can still easily stop it with my finger. Now if we connected nothing but dead rechargeable batteries to this motor and then turned it repeatedly, it will eventually replace the rechargeable batteries. So these simple electric motors can also operate as electrical generators. And the simple motor also demonstrates how physical motion, such as provided by the solar, wind, and thermal energy, is converted to electrical power. In fact, most of the energy we use today is used by boiling water created by burning natural gas or coal and using that steam to turn a steam turbine that turns a generator. So most of modern energy production basically combines the concept of the Stirling engine and the generator. However, the copper coils of a generator do not capture the full force of the magnetic field and only captures a small part of it. The generator is only one part of the story of how we can use magnetism to not only generate electricity from an input force, but also to amplify power and create those input forces. Let me show you how powerful even a very small magnet can be. This thin, 1-inch diameter, 1/16 of an inch magnet can easily lift this 5-pound weight. It could hold this weight for decades. Now I can easily stop the radiometer, the pinwheel, the Stirling engine, and the electrical motor with my finger. This thin magnet is clearly demonstrating a force much greater than the other experiments. The rest of this video will explain this discrepancy, and will explain how we can finally take full advantage of the properties of electromagnetism. Before I get started on how we can capture all the energy we need with iron and electromagnetism, I would like to show you a demonstration of how we can amplify an input force using only permanent magnets. This experiment is important because it proves that we can capture the energy from magnetism in a way similar to capturing wind energy with a windmill. Certain types and combinations of ferromagnetic materials can retain a magnetic charge, and these are called permanent magnets. Permanent magnets have their own interesting set of properties. Some of the properties of permanent magnets can also be used to directly amplify an input force. First, let me show you how when two magnets have the same side poles facing each other, they repulse each other with the exact same force that would occur if the opposite sides were attracting each other. So it completely counterbalances the attracting force. The other property of magnets that you need to know is the shear force. How do you separate a strong magnet? Well, you always shear it apart perpendicular to their poles. You do not pull them apart, you shear them apart. It's a simple demonstrable fact that the shear force is always less than the pull force. Now generally the pull force is greater than the shear force by a factor greater than 3 times. Why are these properties important and how can we take advantage of it? Well, here is a permanent magnet piston that I invented. You can see that the position of the anchor magnet in the middle is fixed, and the piston magnet is attached to the counterweight magnet. Now, the counterweight magnet is repulsed from the anchor magnet. The piston magnet is attracted to a fourth magnet that I call the trigger magnet. When the trigger magnet is underneath the piston magnet, the counterweight magnet is pulled towards the anchor magnet, thereby storing nearly the full pull force between the piston and trigger magnets. The trigger magnet can then be moved perpendicular to the piston, releasing over 3 times more energy than is used to move the trigger magnet. You can see the input and output power curves in this graph on my shirt. Now let me show you. There's absolutely no way that you can hold back the power release with each pull with your finger. With each pull, this is releasing a force far, far greater than any of the other experiments we have seen so far. It's not hard at all to imagine a lot of uses for this phenomenon. In fact, there are a number of possible ways to amplify the input force much greater than 3 times. This alone could be used to produce a lot of extra usable clean power. However, there is also a different and simple way to amplify power using nothing but copper and iron. And this is what the remainder of this video will explain. Before I go into explaining how to amplify and capture power using only copper and iron, I would like to give you an analogy that will help explain why it does not contradict any known physical science in any way. See, whenever there's a two-way differential, such as hot or cold, or high pressure and low pressure, there's a potential energy there that can be captured. If there were 2 rooms, one hot and one cold, we could capture usable energy until the rooms were at the same temperature. An air conditioner requires energy because we are increasing the differential and not decreasing this differential. In magnets, there is a binary magnetic field. The binary magnetic field is a two-way differential. This is created by the electron spinning around perpetually around the nucleus of the atom. This is why the differential will never be equalized, just as long as the domains in the magnet are aligned. Capturing this energy from magnets is like a water wheel capturing the energy from a stream, or a windmill capturing the energy from a blowing wind. This analogy explains why it does not violate any laws of physics to capture the energy from magnets. The magnetic force flows around the magnet regardless of whether or not we capture the energy. We are simply capturing the inherent flow of this energy. To understand magnetism, we must first think of what it is on the atomic level. Magnetism is a quantum phenomenon and is basically one way that certain types of atoms and their electrons that are in specific states can interact with other types of atoms and their electrons in similar special states. Magnetism is believed to be caused by synchronized electrons that perpetually spin around atomic nuclei at the speed of light, warping the fabric of space-time. This leaves something akin to the wake of a boat in water that manifests itself as the magnetic field. There are several various states and instances where magnetism can form or interact with atoms on a subatomic level, but we will focus on just a couple of these. Specifically, we will focus on magnetism's effect on iron and copper. This is iron and this is copper. Most types of matter and states of matter seem to be only slightly or completely non-affected by magnetism, and these are not of interest here, such as the magnet is completely unattracted and has very little effect on wood. Electricity and magnetism are intrinsically related. The two are often referred to as electromagnetism. One common form of electricity is the movement of electrons from atom to atom in a conductor. Some elements are considered to be conductive. Although there are many other conductors, we will focus on just the most common conductor used, copper. In a conductor like copper that has electrons flowing through it, the flow of the electrons causes them to synchronize, thereby creating a magnetic field. Copper is an element with one electron in its outer shell that is able to move between different atoms when exposed to either a voltage source or a changing magnetic field. When a straight copper wire is exposed to a voltage source, the outer shell electrons will align their orbits as they move along the wire. This produces an outwardly radiating magnetic field. When a live copper wire is coiled around in a circle like this, the magnetic field will become a binary magnetic field and will have two poles, just like in a permanent magnet. In a permanent magnet, the electrons are synchronized without a current moving from atom to atom. Conversely, magnetism is commonly used to generate electricity by subjecting coils of copper wires to a fluctuating binary magnetic field. So, electricity can cause magnetism, and magnetism can cause electricity. This is a flashlight with a magnet and a coil of copper wire, and when the magnet is moved, you can see it produces electricity. The magnetic field pushes and pulls the electrons in the outer shell of the copper, thereby moving them. And so this is the relationship between electricity and magnetism, or electromagnetism. However, this is not the full story. This is because magnetism will interact with copper and iron very differently. We have to imagine how magnetism interacts with both copper and iron separately, and then compare and contrast their relationships and then we can learn how to use them together. Only then will we understand how we can use these separate set of properties to both amplify power and also to capture the full energy from magnetism. Some elements are considered ferromagnetic, such as iron. From here on, we will simply use the word iron, although other ferromagnetic materials can be used as well. Also, low carbon steel, like this, is also a suitable equivalent of iron, as it contains mostly iron and is magnetic. Iron and similar elements have 2 electrons in their outer shell, and this particular feature is the reason for their unique properties. When exposed to an external magnetic field, the outer electrons in an iron material will automatically synchronize and align themselves, and it will create their own binary magnetic field. This results in iron being able to vastly amplify a magnetic field, whereas copper cannot. This fact has been known for hundreds of years and was observed by René Descartes in the early 1600s. The natural amplification of energy is nothing new. The property of resonance has been used to amplify sound energy for millennia. Magnetic amplification can occur when iron is combined with a permanent magnet or placed inside a copper coil that has a current applied to it. Let me show you how iron will amplify a permanent magnet. What we're going to do is take this very thin magnet, 1 inch in diameter, 1/16 of an inch thick, and a non-magnetic steel washer, 1 inch in diameter and 1/16 of an inch thick. I'm going to show you how the iron washer will amplify the magnetic field of this magnet. If we take this thin magnet, it will hold 13 sheets of this thick paper. Now watch what happens when I try to add one more sheet. It will no longer hold the paper to the weight. Just falls right off. However, if I piggyback this iron washer on it, it will go from holding 13 sheets of paper to 19 sheets of paper, 6 more sheets. That's an amplification of about 45%. Only by using this extra little piece of iron. Now, a copper coil that has a current applied to it will have a relatively weak magnetic field, as copper has only 1 electron creating the field, and it simply does not create a very strong field. Simply placing iron inside the coil will vastly amplify the magnetic force. Let me demonstrate. This is a electromagnet that I made, and it does not have any iron core. This is another electromagnet that I made, and the only difference between these 2 electromagnets, they both have the same amount of copper and number of coils, is that this electromagnet has this amount of iron inside of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pour some of these little iron staples onto the table, and I'm going to show you the difference. And what's going to happen when we connect the batteries to the electromagnet without any iron inside of it, we'll be lucky if we can pick up even just one of these little staples. Okay. Picked up one little staple. However, when we connect an identical electromagnet to the batteries that has the iron core in it, we'll pick up well over 100 of these staples. Many ferromagnetic materials such as iron will not retain their magnetism when they are no longer in a magnetic field. This is useful for use in electromagnets that can be turned on and off repeatedly. The ability to amplify the magnetism of a copper coil with an iron core, as well as the ability to turn the resulting electromagnet on and off, are both key facts that you must know, which will allow you to understand and look at magnetism in a new way and as a source of energy. It is important to fully understand the difference between the way that magnetism interacts with copper and the way that it interacts with iron in order to understand how we can capture usable energy from magnetism alone. A magnet does not stick to copper. However, a magnet dropped through a copper tube will fall much slower than if dropped outside of the tube. This is because the magnetism relatively weakly interacts with the electrons in copper in a fundamentally different way than it interacts with iron. Even though copper relatively weakly interacts with the magnetic flux when compared with iron, there is a resistance, and in a generator, this resistance is converted into usable power in the form of electricity. Whenever I turn this little small electric motor, which can also be used as a generator, you can see it turns a few times and then stops. That is the resistance of the magnets to the copper. The resistance can be overcome in many ways, and in current energy production, it is usually provided by hydroelectric power or steam turbines powered by burning gas, coal, or nuclear fission. Another great benefit of copper is that the energy can be transmitted long distances over copper power lines. In contrast, a magnet will not only stick to iron, but it will also be strongly attracted to it from a distance. A magnet's resistance when dropped through an iron tube would be vastly greater than the resistance dropped through a copper tube, and it'd have to actually be greatly weighted down to fall at all. As already stated, a useful property of iron over copper is that it will actually naturally greatly amplify a much weaker magnetic field, such as in the coil of the electromagnet. Another key property of iron over copper is that it can interact with magnetism at a distance and can be used to capture the total force of the magnetic field of a magnet or an electromagnet. The importance of this will be explained more fully later. Let us review the key facts so far. Magnetism is likely caused by synchronized electrons that perpetually spin around the atomic nuclei at the speed of light with tremendous energy, warping the fabric of space-time into a magnetic field. We can use the properties of magnetism and its very different relationships to iron and copper to capture the energy from this perpetual quantum motion. Iron amplifies a magnetic force. This can be used in electromagnets that can be turned on and off. Iron is also extremely strongly attracted to magnetism. That iron locks onto magnetic forces so much more strongly than copper is why copper is better for use in generators and electric motors. We can use all of these facts to amplify and fully capture magnetic forces, and then convert those forces to electricity. Copper can be used with magnetism to generate and transport electricity. Some of this electricity can be diverted to make weak magnetic fields that can be both amplified and then fully captured with iron and used as the input force of the generator. You will soon clearly understand that it is these facts that have been proven here experimentally that will allow us to amplify and generate excess electricity using nothing but iron and copper. The steam engine was first developed in the late 1600s and early 1700s. They were not all that different from the Stirling engine. Today, gas, coal, and nuclear fission use heat to create steam that turns turbines and provide us with the vast majority of the energy that we use, basically using the same technology hundreds of years ago. Even the earliest steam engines used the binary differential of hot and cold to create energy. Of course, now the engines are usually turbines that are connected to generators. The modern generator was developed in the middle of the 1800s. So the scientific basis for the vast majority of the power that we use today is fundamentally identical to technology developed over 160 years ago. The fundamental basis of the generator is fairly simple. A conductive coil of copper wire is exposed to a changing magnetic field, and this creates electrical current in the copper that can be transported and used in many different ways. The electricity generated is directly proportional to the resistance of the coils to the magnetic field. The magnetic field that generates all of the current in many generators actually comes from an electromagnet that uses only a very small portion of the total energy generated. This is called self-induction. This magnetic field is amplified with iron, as would be expected. The amplification with iron is why only a small portion of the total electricity generated is needed to create the magnetic flux necessary to power a self-induction generator. However, in such a generator, the benefit of iron amplification cannot be captured or utilized. If you increase the strength of the magnetic field further and the number of coils, you will also increase the resistance between the magnetic field and the copper. This means it will need more energy to turn the generator, and in a generator, the relationship between the energy put in and the electricity put out is directly correlated. An analogy to understand the difference between the way magnetism acts on copper and iron would be a comparison of oars in a rowboat and a powerlifter lifting weights. In a generator, the magnetic force interacts with copper. The size of the magnet in a generator would be comparable to the oar in the water. The bigger the magnetic force in the generator, the wider the oar. The person in the boat is the force moving the generator, such as steam and a steam turbine. The bigger the oar, the more force the person in the boat needs to move the boat. The relationship between magnetism and iron is instead like a power lifter. The size of the magnet in this case is the size and the strength of the power lifter. The bigger the magnetic force, the more weight the magnet can directly lift. What we need to do is make the power lifter the person rowing the boat. If we do that, then we can finally utilize the amplification properties of iron, and no other force such as steam would be needed. In order to capture the amplified energy from electromagnets, a different mechanism is needed that will capture the full force from the electromagnet's amplified magnetic field and convert it into physical energy. The physical energy can then be used as desired or connected to the traditional generator and convert the physical energy to electrical energy. The mechanism for capturing the full force of electromagnets' amplified magnetic field and converting it into physical energy with little resistance only involves more iron and is actually extremely straightforward, familiar, and simple in every possible way. What I'm about to tell you next really should have been invented and fully established at least 120 years ago. The mechanism required to fully capture the force of a magnet is very similar to the ubiquitous, familiar, and ordinary internal combustion engine. The only real difference is that electromagnets amplified by an iron core will be used in place of fuel, and the pistons will be pulled downwards towards the electromagnets instead of being pushed outward by the explosion of fuel. The pistons will use a flat iron strike plate instead of ordinary pistons. The iron in the electromagnet core will amplify the input energy, and the flat iron strike plate will fully capture that amplified magnetic force and convert it into a physical motion. Due to the properties of electromagnetism, the pistons should be placed farther apart than in a normal combustion engine, and the length of the stroke will need to be shortened. This will make the crankshaft engine proportion slightly different in a magnet piston engine when compared to the internal combustion engine. Also, the electromagnets should be deeper in comparison to ordinary commercial electromagnets. Instead of being this thick, it should be about 2.5 times thicker to deepen the magnetic field of the electromagnets. Keep in mind that what we are doing is as follows. We can take a small electrical input and make an electromagnet by coiling conductive wire in a loop and running current through it. The magnetic field of the electromagnet is then vastly amplified with the iron core. We can then fully capture the magnetic field of the electromagnet with an iron strike plate. This motion can be transferred mechanically via a crankshaft to a generator, which will then convert all of the amplified motion into electrical energy. The energy output will be greater than the energy input due to the amplification of the magnetic force by the iron core. A relatively small portion of this energy can be then rerouted back to the electromagnets to continue powering the engine. These engines can be used in any way that the internal combustion engine can be used. The fuel for the magnet piston engine is the elemental iron cores of the electromagnet. The iron cores provide an inexhaustible source of clean energy, and this is not contrary to any known laws of physics in any way. I can easily prove mathematically the electromagnet piston engine, but I'm going to do that in another video. There are pros and cons to the electromagnet piston engine. This is not free energy or a miracle solution by any means. There is a considerable amount of metals, manufacturing, labor, and other materials that will go into even a 10 horsepower version of this engine, for example. The magnet piston engine's benefit will more than compensate for any shortcomings. It won't require any fuel other than iron to run, and it can operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without any external fuel source, sunlight, or wind. Small versions of this engine can also provide much needed resource relief and provide energy for much of the less developed world. However, the efficiency of the electromagnet piston engine will increase with size. This is why ideally large megawatt and even gigawatt versions of the magnet piston engine will be used to provide clean, pollution-free energy to the industrialized world at costs competitive to any other fuel source. I'm not thinking small here. I believe this technology is ideally suited for large-scale energy production. I am fully aware that there are some technical details that I've left out that will need to be addressed, but I have no doubt that they can easily be overcome. I have struggled greatly to try to bring you this message. I have been rejected and ostracized. Rumors have been spread against me. But this is nothing new in history, and I don't take it personally. In 500 BC, a philosopher named Anaxagoras was sentenced to death in ancient Greece for saying that the sun and moon were not gods, but rather extremely hot rocks, which was an advancement in science at the time. He escaped death by living in another area of Greece, but not before they destroyed his home. You see, the leaders of the city had a sun temple and a moon temple, and they were afraid that his claims would cut into their profits. In the early 1800s, a man named Semmelweis actually tried to convince the world that doctors needed to wash their hands before assisting birth to prevent the mothers and their children from dying. His colleagues were so offended by the idea that they were ignorant of this and that they had unclean hands that they shunned him. He was so thoroughly rejected and shunned by the professional establishment of the time that he wound up dying, probably murdered, in an insane asylum. It wasn't until decades later that the work of Louis Pasteur, who also encountered resistance, and Joseph Lister vindicated everything that he said. The truth is, history repeats itself. The people who would reject this, or simple and basic science, can be put into either the category of the elite of the Anaxagoras or Semmelweis' time. In Anaxagoras' case, the motive was just pure profit. In Semmelweis' case, they directly caused the death of countless mothers and their infants simply due to the fact that they couldn't bring themselves to wash their unclean hands and admit they were wrong. Countless suffering was caused and countless lives were lost during this time. And it was all because that the elite of the time couldn't admit that they were wrong. A lot of times people just hate admitting they're wrong. Unfortunately, many generations of scientists have been incorrectly indoctrinated to believe that what I'm saying is impossible. We are at a point in history when a lot of people believe that what is true is false and what is false is true. There are many people who just can't admit that they're wrong. It's like the DA who sends an innocent man to jail. Even in the face of overwhelming contrary evidence that would acquit the innocent man, they will always strongly resist admitting they were wrong, simply because it makes them look bad. No one should think for a second that this is the final evolution for a search for clean and affordable power. The truth is that the universe and the matter in it contains so much energy locked inside of it, I think it's actually easy to kind of stumble upon ways to unlock it. I honestly believe that there are a lot of people out there, people who make these so-called free energy claims, have in fact stumbled upon various ways to tap into this energy. The only problem is if you don't fully understand it and you can't fully explain how it works, then it comes off seemingly foolish and wishful thinking. The electromagnet piston engine can definitely be improved with superconductive materials as well as specialized ceramic ferromagnetic materials. There are many different ways to improve the performance of the magnet piston engine that I have not gone over here. Another area of research will be in applying the principles I am teaching here to plasma, the ionic gas that is the fourth state of matter. Even after iron energy is established, I believe that the cost, ease, and availability of clean energy production can take another giant leap forward at any time. I have no doubt that this will lead the way to real and sustainable space exploration. I believe this is why it is critical that we fully support NASA and the space programs, as we also work hard to clean up our messes here on Earth. Here are reasons why the magnet piston engine makes sense to people now. Number one, it's on par with the cost of other energy sources, but it is safe and clean energy. Number two, the cornerstone of civilization is cheap and plentiful energy, which now needs to be guilt-free due to the possibility of global warming. Number three, the cost of base materials, iron and copper, will always hold their full value. Number four, they're too bulky to really replace internal combustion engines, and they can gradually be phased out in favor of electric vehicles and hydrogen vehicles. There's really no immediate danger to oil interests. Number five, they're more efficient the larger the scale, so I think it's ideal for large-scale industrial power plants. They can be made as replacements for other power plants as they are phased out due to age, pollution, and inefficiency. Number six, power companies will make more profit and customers will save. Number seven, it will actually help keep power production centralized. Home solar and wind will actually become less competitive and much less necessary. Number eight, this actually should be 120-year-old technology. I believe the world is already 2 technological revolutions behind. When the next innovation gets out of the bag, the changes will likely be unpredictable and uncontrolled. Number 9. The suppression of such simple science and technology is just really, utterly ludicrous. Number 10. We need to colonize space. The country that first colonizes space will likely have a huge advantage for a very long time. The only reason we're not colonizing space now is because the people of this country have incorrectly been led to believe that energy and resources are very scarce. Number 11. We can move from an attitude and atmosphere of deprivation and constriction to one of growth and optimism again. Number 12. This can prevent other countries from developing nuclear energy and weapons. What I'm saying is important because cheap and plentiful energy is the most important cornerstone to a modern civilization. Since we are about at or past peak oil, and we now know that emissions from fossil fuels pose a threat to our environment in many ways, we need to add another criteria: guilt-free, cheap, and plentiful energy. I'd like to talk about how this can be used in areas with insufficient civilizational capacity. Specifically, I'd like to look at Haiti as an example. The first thing they'll need is vast amounts of cheap, clean, guilt-free energy. Elemental iron energy can provide that. This is necessary for sanitation and water treatment. Wastewater needs to be adequately processed and sterilized and used to make infertile soil fertile. This all requires a lot of pumps, and pumps need energy. Pumps can direct water and irrigate fields, turning them from wasteland to productive soil. Desalination plants, which require a lot of energy, can be used to make usable water from seawater. Then you will have cheap and plentiful food and water for the population. Of course, energy is also needed for transportation, and elemental iron energy can provide that when used with electric or hydrogen vehicles. The population can then focus on improving their living conditions and obtaining the education required to maintain the pumps, food distribution, water, and power. Personal health and hygiene can then increase. When this is done, the population can look towards a better standard of living with increased consumption and the production of various goods. They can then have things like air conditioning, pizza delivery, video games, and leisure time. With elemental iron energy, this is a completely guilt-free process. When populations reach this level, population growth tends to level off. Oddly enough, stress in a population is what increases the population and reproduction. It's not the other way around. I do not believe that for any population or group to succeed civilizationally, that any other group or population must suffer or be oppressed in any way. In fact, I believe that we must lead by example, and only then can we really help other peoples reach their full civilizational capacity through education and direction. The direction that is needed to be given is in the form of jobs and careers and the promise of higher future wages and higher standards of living. That is how you lead a population to a better future. I believe the argument against consumption is not the correct argument. In a civilized society, consumption is needed to create jobs. Jobs are needed to keep people from being idle, joining gangs, becoming violent, and engaging in criminal activity, rioting, and doing other things associated with the lack of civilized purpose and focus. The correct argument is how we can create a productive civilization that does not harm the planet. I can think of many variations of the concepts that I have shown you that would be viable on both large and small scales and in many different situations. I can think of countless experiments that I would like to perform that would further our knowledge. I have a lot more that I would like to say about future urban development with cheap, clean, and guilt-free power, as well as space colonization. Unfortunately, our society somehow seems to have no interest in any of this whatsoever at this time. You know, the Wright brothers were also rejected and ridiculed by American society as well for a crazy little invention they called the airplane. It wasn't until they moved to another country that they got the respect and recognition that they deserved. Unfortunately, someone else will have to take the baton from me. Unless someone recognizes my work and helps me out, this is the end of the road for me. We are out of time.